Buenas tardes a todos, bienvenidos. Qué gusto tenerlos aquí. En nombre de la Universidad Bar-Ilan, quiero agradecer su presencia. Mi nombre es Nelly Cohen y soy la directora de Amigos de Bar-Ilan, México. Quiero agradecer profundamente al doctor Gilad Wiener por su valioso tiempo. Gracias también al grupo de Amigos de Bar-Ilan por su importante apoyo. Se encuentra con nosotros el ingeniero Nathan Feldman, que es el presidente de Amigos de Bar-Ilan, México. También nos acompañan por parte de la Oficina Internacional de la Universidad. Y quiero decirles que al final de la plática vamos a tener un espacio para preguntas y respuestas. En este momento quiero presentar a Ariel Elstein, que es un muy querido amigo de Amigos de Bar-Ilan, México. Tiene 25 años haciendo cabildeo y asuntos públicos en México. Tiene un par de maestrías en el extranjero, en Inglaterra específicamente. Dirige el Lexig desde hace 10 años, que es su empresa de monitoreo, inteligencia y vinculación legislativa. Gracias, Ariel. Te doy la palabra.
Gracias, Nelly. Gracias a todos. Me da mucho gusto estar ahora con el doctor Gilad Wiener y todo el equipo de Amigos de la Universidad de Bar-Ilan. Permítanme presentarlo. El doctor Gilad Wiener es abogado, mediador y experto en resolución de conflictos. Es el director ejecutivo de Israeli Congress on Judaism and Democracy de la Universidad de Bar-Ilan, una iniciativa social destinada a cambiar el discurso público y reducir las tensiones sociales en la sociedad israelí, anclando los métodos de construcción de consenso y mediación como el estándar para resolver sus conflictos. Antes de su trabajo en el Israeli Congress, Gilad ocupó varios cargos de investigación, incluyendo en el Centro para la Religión, la Nación y el Estado en el Instituto de Democracia de Israel, en el Laboratorio de Resolución de Conflictos Judiciales en la Universidad Bar-Ilan y en el Centro de Patrimonio Menachem Begin. Gilad obtuvo su título de abogado en la Universidad de Bar-Ilan, donde también completó una tesis doctoral en el programa de resolución de conflictos. En su carrera legal, Gilad se desempeñó como secretario legal para el expresidente de la Corte Suprema de Israel, Miriam Naor, y como litigante civil en uno de los principales bufetes de abogados de Israel. Es para nosotros un privilegio y un honor tener a Gilad con nosotros y le cedo la palabra. Bakasha, Gilad.
Okay. I think I understood that you're talking about me. So, good evening, everyone, and I apologize that I cannot have this conversation in Spanish. And thank you for having me, Mexican Friends of Bar-Ilan. It's a very unique opportunity for me, both as a Bar-Ilan employee, Bar-Ilan staff member, but also as an individual. Some of my Mexican family is actually here. You can see Anna Braverman. I don't know if anyone else could join us today. So thank you also for being here. I will say, I don't know what is the normal format from here, but I was asked to speak with you today about Israel as a Jewish and democratic state and the many, many opinions there are about this very complicated notion. I will try to do this conversation, and I'm emphasizing as a conversation, in 3 parts. The first part will be trying to present with you the complexity of this idea, the current complexity maybe. It was always a complex idea, but it's currently very visible how complicated it is. And the second part, I'll try to say a little, or tell you a little about what is Bar-Ilan through the Israeli Congress is doing in order to
Sorry, Gilad, just a minute, please. Your microphone went off. Just a minute, please.
I think I unmuted myself. In Hebrew, we're saying "Imen ani li mili." Okay, and so the second part, I don't know where you missed me. We'll talk about a little bit what is Bar-Ilan through the Israeli Congress is doing to preserve Israel as a Jewish and democratic state. In the last part, we'll leave it open to an open conversation with you to hear what you care about what we just spoke, or just even general ideas that you're interested and are relevant to our conversation. And I think we'll start unless anyone has an urgent question right now. Okay, so with your permission, I will share my screen and you will see it in a second. Okay. Okay, so that's the topic of the conversation. If you want, I know that you were promised 1,000 opinions in one law. I can promise you that you will hear many, 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 many opinions about that. And I want to take you, let's see if I can also see myself. I cannot see you through that. I want to take you through a little journey in history. And hello, I hear myself double, so maybe it's... Okay, so by the way, you can also chat, send questions through the chat, and the kind people of Bar-Ilan will try and convene that as questions also throughout the way. I took you to a very specific moment in time. You can see on the side of the presentation the fact that I write when dreams become reality, because that was a very concrete moment in the Jewish history where all the dreams of Jewish people in thousands of years became a reality. And Ben Gurion, where you see him in the short guy, he almost looked like the other people who were sitting down, but he's actually standing up and reading out the Declaration of Independence. And in this moment, he tried to manifest this dream and how we envision it to become into reality, into practice. Okay, and let's take a little paragraph from it, the most important one maybe, in which we can try to understand what model of a state was envisioned in this very unique moment in time. So we won't read it out loud. I think I have something like 10 minutes for this part of this conversation, 15 maybe. But if you can read fast in English, you'll see it's a very complex model, very ambitious one, if you may. And let's highlight some of it, okay? So what kind of a model of the state of Israel? It will be open for Jewish immigration, right? But it will do only part of it. Will be based on freedom and justice as envisioned by the people, the prophets of Israel. But it will also ensure complete equality, right? But it will also guarantee freedom and religion and coexistence and everything, just no matter who you are, and will try to obey international law. And each one of those notions, we can understand how it's a very short, maybe be sentence, but it's a bag full of promises in that sense. So those sometimes even contradicting ideas make us face, as Israelis who live in the Jewish and democratic state, in a reality where we have a lot of challenges. And I want to present to you 4 perspectives of those challenges. And those 4 perspectives, obviously, they're not the only one. We can offer more perspective. They're not unique maybe just to Israel, but they're unique in the sense that they're unique for our reality in this very unique land. And I want to go with you through those perspectives in a form of 4 questions and discuss, or maybe not, I don't know if discuss, but show you some examples of how complicated it is to fulfill this very ambitious model that we presented ourselves, that we hope to achieve, currently still hope, in our reality here in Israel. So you can see security, you can see human rights, you can see peoplehood, and you can see land. What does it mean? What do I mean by those perspectives, those topics? So let's start with the first question that I want to present with you. So when I ask about security, my meaning is, how can a Jewish and democratic state secure itself as such? Okay, this is a very wide question, which we can have a full academic course just on that, but we won't do that. I'll just tell you that, or present you the complexity of this question through a tale of three fences, or three borders. The first one is, maybe you can recognize it as a picture of the outskirts of Jerusalem, Yerushalayim. Okay? Maybe some of you remember in the late 90s, middle 90s, till the early 2000s, there was a wave of terrorist attacks in the middle of Israeli cities. Suicide terrorists bombed themselves, buses exploded, and the reality in Israel was very, very hard. A solution was needed. So the government of Israel decided that building a long fence, some people call it the wall, there are many nicknames to that, will be the solution to isolate the territories of the West Bank from main cities in Israel. And it was effective, but it came with a big debate in Israel and outside of Israel, whether or not that was a proportional measure. And it came to the Supreme Court. You heard that I worked there. Actually, in some aspects, still is debated in courts what is the right way to protect Israel from terrorists from the West Bank. Because you can see here, the wall sometimes cuts in the middle of neighborhoods, Arab neighborhoods in that sense. Is it the right thing to do or not? Left and right in Israel constantly debate on that question. But that's not the only example for borders and the challenges that they face for the Jewish and democratic state. So throughout the 2000s, there was a growing number of African asylum seekers, refugees, work, immigration, depends on your political stance on that, who moved from Egypt in the south to Israel in order to find an answer to a need that they have. Some of them argue that they are refugees, others just look for a job, but mainly there was a debate about the status of those people and how Israel should relate to that. And the answer, again, as you may guess, or maybe you've seen yourself in your eyes, was another fence, okay? Another long border in the Egyptian border that blocked that wave. I don't know what's your opinion about that, but let me ask you whether or not your opinion changed when you discovered, or if you discover, that this fence today also blocks ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and all of that family of terrorist organization to inflict terror from the south to Israel. Is it now more justified or not? And another border that we can talk about is the Syrian border. You may know that in Syria there is a civil war. Actually, it tuned down lately, but humanitarian crisis. So there was another big debate. What should the Jewish democratic state do? Because 70 years ago or 80 years ago, when our ancestors fled from Europe, some people argue nobody offered them help. So maybe the Jewish and democratic state should offer help. But some other people say, that's our enemy. We have been with them in deadly wars. We should not take side of that conflict. And there are merits to each argument, but there was a big debate. What is the Jewish and democratic thing to do? It's still going on, right? There was a humanitarian hospital and all that. I don't know how familiar you are, but that's complicated. So that's only the complication in security. But what about human rights there? Okay? What do I mean by human rights? I can ask you, is the Jewish and democratic state a threat for human rights? So maybe for some of you, this very question will be an insult. What do you mean? To be Jewish is to be moral. How can it be a threat for human rights? Let me tell you that many Jewish people sometimes argue that the Jewish and democratic state, because it's Jewish and democratic, is depriving them from their human rights. And those arguments comes from both left and right, okay? look at the right side of your picture, member of the Knesset Yehuda Glick, I don't know if you know him. He's a very right-wing person who argues that he should be allowed to pray and even sometimes just visit in Temple Mount, but many times he's always prevented from praying there, but many times even just for visit in Temple Mount. Long story, but he says, the chief rabbinate says that it's not allowed to pray there. My personal halachic opinion is that I can pray there and at least visit. But you, the government, do not allow me to practice my Jewish Orthodox religion. Okay? On the left side, you have liberal, not right wing. I would say more lean to the left, at least, of the women of the wall, who are liberal women who want to pray in the way that you see in the picture next to the Western Wall. Okay? Kotel Ma'aravi. And they're also not allowed by the same chief rabbinate who does not allow Yehuda Glick. And they have the same argument, sounds very familiar, because the chief rabbinate in the Jewish and democratic state, we can not practice our Judaism. I'm not choosing sides here. I'm just saying this is an ongoing debate in the Israeli society. What does it mean to be Jewish and democratic? And are there restrictions? Are there threats? Okay? Let's go on. Peoplehood. What do I mean by peoplehood? And the complexity of living in a Jewish and democratic state, the only Jewish and democratic state in the world. Okay? How does a democratic state understand Judaism? There are many democracies. There are even plenty of Christian democracy. Take the example of the UK. The Queen is the head of church as well. But the only Jewish and democratic state is Israel. But we need to define what does it mean to be Jewish. So in the left picture that you can see here, you can see a drawing that I call them the three Shmuels. From the left, whoever of you reads Hebrew, you can read Ani Yehudi, I'm Jewish. Shmuel from Mea Shearim, ultra-Orthodox neighborhood in Jerusalem, who says that the current narrative there is, we're not Zionists. We're actually against, some of them say we're against the Jewish state. But we're Jewish and we live here because we're Jewish, but we have nothing to do with the country. We don't care about that. We actually oppose it. We think it's a sin. So that's one Shmuel. The other Shmuel is Shmuelik from the kibbutz, secular kibbutz, who says, I don't care. I'm not religious. I'm Israeli. That's my identity. And I am part of the Jewish and democratic state because I'm Israeli. Or is it Sam, also Shmuel, who is an avid Zionist, but he doesn't live in Israel, but he sees himself, because he's Jewish, part of it. Or to the very right, you see Brother Daniel. I don't know whoever heard about this amazing story. We don't have time, but I can tell you his name is also Shmuel. He was a Holocaust survivor by the name of Shmuel Rofeisen, who after finding rescue in a monastery, converted to Christianity, but was still felt part of the Jewish people and actually saved many, many Jews throughout the Holocaust. And in the 60s, early 60s, wanted to make Aliyah, to move to Israel because of the law of return, Chok HaShvut. Okay? And his point was, if every Jewish person is entitled to move to Israel, I'm Jewish with a Christian faith, let me move. I'll give you a second to think. The law was not clear. It came to the court, Supreme Court. They had to decide. I'll give you a second to guess what they decided, and think also what you would have decided. But the answer was not. The court said, while we don't know exactly which one of those Shmuels is right, the Zionist, the Jewish one, the religious one, the secular one, whatever you want, we know that you cannot be Jewish if you're Christian. That was the answer. And the law was even changed to that very definition later on. But it was a big debate, and still is a debate today by many, many people. Some people ask today actually to be registered not as Jewish in their registry in the Ministry of Internal Affairs, but as Israelis. There are many debates about the nature of our country, okay? Current debates. And there are many opinions, as I promised. But the last perspective that I want to share with you of challenges is challenges that come to the very, very basic notion of the land. We have a country, but we are in a specific plot of area. So you see the satellite map, right? Is Israel, is it just a piece of land, or is it an idea or a mixture? So let me show you first of all a graph. More or less rough numbers, more or less updated. Israel, our society, right? We have here, from an ethnic point of view, from a religious point of view, a big majority of Jews. So we're a Jewish and democratic state, right? But if I'll show you a map of regions, and I'll tell you that wherever you see the color green, Jews are in a minority. So does Druze in the Golan, to the very top right of the picture that you see, do they have a claim that they can join Syria as they see themselves? Because they're a majority there? Is it less of a Jewish and democratic state in the Golan or in the Galil? Obviously, legally it's not, but to their view, at least it is. But it's not only there. In the south, Bedouin, the nomads people who lived here, many of them before even the establishment of the state of Israel in 48, say, we own land, we don't need you to tell us what we own or what's part of our land or what's not. So they build houses. And then the country says, no, in democracy, there are laws and there is registry, and if you don't ask permission, we'll ruin your home. But they say, how can you tell us what to do with our land? We were here before you. A lot of debate, not only local, but also many international entities come and intervene. But the country says, what do you want? That's, even if you were Jewish, we would ask you the same thing, right? So there is a big debate about that. Majority of Israelis obviously disagree with a position that you can build wherever you think you are, but still there is a debate, not only local. But what if you can just mute yourself, because there is an echo. Okay, thank you. I can tell you it's not only for, you can hear me still, right? It's not only for Druze or Bedouin, also for Jewish people. In 2004, Prime Minister Ariel Sharon decided that Israel should withdraw from the Gaza Strip. Huge crisis, conflict within the Jewish population, Israeli society. There was a crisis because the people who were sent there by the government said, you won't tell us what is Israel and what's not. God told us, right? You cannot tell us leave our synagogue and let someone ruin it. But still the Jewish democratic government said that will be what we will do. They used their force and took them out. More or less, half of the people support this move in Israel, and half of the people were against it. Those who supported said that's the only choice we can do in order to deal with the terror from Gaza. But those who were against it said it's not up for you to decide what's Israel and what's not. Huge controversy. So that's an example of how difficult this question is. So we talked about those challenges, but we talked about it separately. But I can promise you they're all connected. You can understand how human rights is connected to the land. You've seen it. You can see how the notion of peoplehood is connected to security, and so forth and so on. But if I hope I'm not depressing you, I want to give you some little hope before we finish this part of the conversation, okay? And let's talk about Hatikva, right? You all know our national anthem. What is the meaning of Hatikva? Hope, right? What is this hope that we talked about it for 2,000 years, right? What is this this thing that we at least sing for and made it an anthem? I would suggest it is to be a free people in our land, almost in the very end, right? And I will urge you to see it in a very unique way. Look at the presentation and try maybe to go a little mile with me on my suggestion. How can we be safe, secure? How can we be free with all our rights? How can we be one peoplehood, right? And how can we be in this land in the very complex notion of it, idea, physically? So what I suggest to you here is to understand Israel society and definition as Jewish democratic state as intentionally complex, because that being Jewish and democratic meaning try to aspire to do the impossible, to live in this in those very complex challenges and make it a reality. And that's what we do here day by day. And I can tell you that Bar-Ilan University is contributing to this, but I think maybe it's a good time before I go and talk about the Israeli Congress, maybe to stop for a little, see if you have a question about that, and then I can tell you what we're actually doing in order to promise Israel to be able to face those challenges and overcome them and make sure that we have here in the future a Jewish democratic state. I'll stop the share for a second so I can see you and hear you better. Okay. If there are any questions.
¿Alguien tiene alguna pregunta? Si quiere, puede hacerla en español y nosotros la vamos a traducir al doctor Wiener.
Sí.
Sí.
Ari, ¿tienes alguna pregunta, algún comentario que quisieras hacer?
Yes, I was thinking about what you were presenting, very interesting, Gilad. I have one question. Does the Arab population really appreciate living in a Jewish and democratic state? For them, makes a difference? Do they see that Israel is completely different from the neighbors in the region and that they have an advantage of living in a country such as Israel?
You're asking a very complicated question, like everything in the Middle East and in Israel. And I think the first thing that we need to understand is there is no Arab population. There are many, many groups within the Arab population, Arab citizens of Israel. There are parts who resent it, okay? And we're not even talking about the Palestinians, right, who are not citizens. We're just talking about people with what we call Tudat Zehut, who are full citizens in Israel, okay? Even among them, there are people who think that Israel is something that is not just, okay? There are many interpretations of why. They think it's not a full democracy if it's by the fact that it's defined as Jewish. Some of them just think it should be an Arab land. There are many opinions about that. Some of which, and there are many surveys who will tell you what is the majority. Some of them, they can live with Israel as a Jewish and democratic state, but they do have harsh criticism about the way the Arab population is treated by the government, okay? And some of which are very much part of Israel society. Some of them even, join the army and join forces. If you can define the Druze as Arab, it's often that their definition, Druze, at least central Israel Druze, are next to Haifa, are serving in the most elite units in the army. Some of the Bedouins from the north are in the police and in the army and so forth. So there is no one opinion among the Arab population. Some of them really do appreciate it, as you suggest. but some of them have harsh criticism and are even against the notion of Jewish and democratic state.
Okay. We have a question here from Mrs. Adela Smeke, and it's a very interesting one. As you may know, there has been an airplane who took like more than 200 Jews from Mexico, some of them doing their Akshara projects, but some of them doing Aliyah, like 50 to 60 people that are really doing Aliyah. And the question is Israel really prepared for a big scale immigration from all over the world?
You know, in the first 18 months of Israel, meaning between 48 to 50, something like that, Israel population tripled itself, okay, through Aliyah. So I don't see, and we made it happen. It wasn't easy, but we made it happen. Israel, I can tell you, there is a consensus. Israel will do whatever it's needed in order to accept every Jew who needs it to be his or her home. So I don't see any realistic scenario that we will face the same wave of Aliyah as we did in the first 18 months. But I can tell you, nowadays we're much stronger, richer than we were when we just were established. So Israel, even if it will be hard, we'll do that. We did it in the 90s with the Russian immigration. So we're talking about 50, 60 people now. That's not, we actually want more. So bring it on.
Yes, but the question is, do you think that the crisis that comes from the COVID, from the pandemic, and the economic crisis that this will bring, if that will push more Jewish communities to think about doing Aliyah? I mean, are we facing a big wave this time? I'm not talking about the 50 or 60 from Mexico, which I understand that they are certainly easy to absorb. But what happens if there's a big Aliyah from France, there's a big Aliyah from Mexico, there's a big Aliyah from Argentina or the US, and we start talking about hundreds of thousands?
So I think each community has its own unique characters. The strong community in Mexico is not like, I would say, the fragile situation in Argentina a few years ago, right? And the communities in the United States are not like the community in France, and so forth and so on. But generally speaking, I think nowadays, not like we're, I would say, in the collapse of the I-1 wall or curtain or in the, after the Holocaust, the biggest communities of Jewish people are in strong countries. You mentioned France, I mentioned the United States, Argentina, Argentina is maybe an exception, but the big numbers of Jews, especially in the United States, are living in very strong countries. So I don't see the COVID situation something that will do a dramatic shift. It will maybe do a little trend. Still Israel is in a better shape than the United States in the terms of COVID-19, but I don't see 5 million Jews from the United States moving to Israel because of the COVID situation. So I think maybe we'll see an increase, but I think it will be in numbers that we will actually see still as a blessing, because we love Aliyah. We think it's a good situation to be at, to expand our Jewish variety here. So I don't see that as a specific challenge.
Okay. Voy a traducir brevemente nada más para el público la respuesta del doctor Gilad Wiener. La verdad es que él no ve un problema, digamos, grave o de Aliyah. Piensa que cada una de las comunidades tienen características peculiares. Y con respecto a la pregunta previa en el tema de los árabes, bueno, pues sí hay diferencias entre el mundo árabe que vive en Israel, de los ciudadanos israelíes. Algunos tienen críticas de cómo son tratados y otros, la verdad, tienen una perspectiva mucho más favorable. Gilad, we have here a question from Mr. Ricardo Zaslavsky, who says that before there were more logistical support to do Aliyah, are they going to continue diminishing? Are they going to increase? How do you see this in the coming future?
So, and truth must be told, the Bible said we'll accept Aliyah. You know, Israel economy, I think, I just read today a statistic from the Central Bureau of Statistics, will have the worst economic year since our establishment. It's not necessarily that we're the poorest we ever been, quite the contrary. We're in the maybe the best scenario that we've been, you know, in many years, in the recent years in Israel. However, our economy now is not in a good place. So I don't see ourselves increasing the support for Jewish communities in Aliyah, but I think we'll preserve the maximum that will be possible with the current measures. But you know, Aliyah is always, I think, a two-way effort. Aliyah is supported not only by Israel, but also by Jewish communities outside of Israel. And I think that this cooperation is now more important than ever. But if you mentioned the COVID situation, I do want to speak with you about a little bit about the Israeli Congress, which I direct, and show you how Israel society is dealing with the current crises that come from the COVID, because all the challenges that I told you are still present today, but many of which became even more dramatic because of the COVID situation, okay? So if you don't mind, maybe I'll share the screen a little and talk with you about two situations, okay? Let's see, I'll go to the end, you heard all that. So we're talking about the Israeli Congress. What is the Israeli Congress? Is a joint venture by Bar-Ilan and Israelis, businessmen and women, who said we need to give the Israeli society the knowledge and the tools. That's what the academia does here, develop the tools and develop the knowledge, to deal with the crises and the challenges and the conflicts that we always have here in Israel. And I'll give you just two examples, okay? But we have all the challenges that I presented, we are trying to deal with those. The first, wrong way. The first is a story about the city of Ashdod. I don't know if you know the city of Ashdod. Beautiful city, sixth biggest city in Israel, if I'm not mistaken by the numbers. On the sea, with a very, very unique population, both Haredi and secular, Olim Chadashim and Vatikim, Tzabre, right? Tzabarim. And Russians and Sephardic and Ashkenazi and everything you can imagine. And a few weeks ago, the Ministry of Health called Ashdod a red city. What does it mean, a red city? A city with an outbreak of corona. Okay? And the Ministry of Health went into the city and intervened, looked at the numbers and said, we need to put a blockade on some quarters of the cities. And by accident, those quarters were especially the Haredi quarters, meaning quarters where ultra-Orthodox religious people live. And that started a big debate in the city. Instead of being a beautiful city on the sea, on the Mediterranean Sea, people started to fight. The secular people said, listen, we have no choice. We support the Ministry of some of them at least said that. We support the Ministry of Health because we need to block the corona to go to other quarters in the city and obviously outside of Ashdod to other places in Israel. That's what we can do. The Haredi population said, you found the easy victim. You didn't even look at the numbers correctly. Even if a quarter was just Haredi, even without the corona outbreak, you included that in the closure. And very fast, the health pandemic became a social pandemic. We have a group, we trained a group there throughout the year, even without connection to the corona, even before that. We gave them both the academic knowledge, how to deal with conflict, but also we gave them precise data, how to understand the situation that they live in. And through our intervention, they understood that they have one common interest. They want to live in a safe and equal city where everyone feel both safe, but also feel that they're being treated equally. And you can see here in the picture that after understanding that, they had a joint venture. Men and women, secular and Haredi, Orthodox, Russian and Ethiopian, everything you can imagine, went to the streets and wore those city vests and gave people tickets. But what kind of tickets? Tickets to people that obey the law, wear masks, keep social distancing, and so forth. And this was such a surprising campaign that people all over Israel, you can see here Ynet, the biggest newspaper, Yediot Achronot, and its biggest website in Israel, Ynet, covered it. Television came and covered it. Because they changed the way, instead of being, in a fight, they found common ground and did something positive together that they all can agree on. That this is one thing that Bar-Ilan and the Congress could contribute to the city of Ashdod to deal with a very, very complicated situation. But maybe also, the second example I want to give you is even more complicated. I live in Jerusalem, and I live just next to the Prime Minister's house in Balfour Street. Currently, it's Bibi Netanyahu's house. And 4 times a week, we have demonstration. 3 times every week. Against corruption, against Netanyahu, for Netanyahu, against the government treatment of Corona, everything you can imagine, and left and right. And just yesterday night, I couldn't step out of my house because 10,000 people came to protest against Netanyahu. And people are not even listening to each other. People don't even listen to each other because they're full of hate. So last week and a half ago, before the protest started, we went to the garden next to the Prime Minister's house. We sat down people in circles, you can see them spread around the park, and had them right and left sit together and talk about why do they protest. The right explained to the left why they are against their calls against Netanyahu, and the left presented their opinion. So instead of telling people you should protest or should not protest, we help them to understand how to protest constructively, so the rift between the right and left won't be devastating for the Israeli society. And that was also covered by media, but also just the people who lead the demonstration understood that they need to do it a bit differently. And we only do that because we have this tool set that Bar-Ilan University and the law department and the Center for Jewish and Democratic Law developed to understand what are the nuances, what are the legal frameworks. So those kind of intervention that the Israeli Congress is doing is exactly what I was talking about it in my first part, is giving the Israeli society the tools how to deal with conflicts and we say in the Jewish tradition, machloket l'shem shamayim, a dispute in the sake of heaven, right? Meaning it's in our very Jewish tradition to disagree. The Talmud, the Gemara, there are books that, put in the records the disagreement between our, scholars. But we need, in order to become, for those conflicts to become constructive, we need to understand how to do it correctly. So in the spirit of the Jewish tradition, that's also why it comes from Bar-Ilan University. We understand the importance of disagreement, but we need to know how to do it l'shem shamayim, how to do it effectively. And that's part of the work that we're doing in Bar-Ilan when we're trying to bring more tools, bring it to the knowledge of more people, and be relevant to the general public as we do, but in more and more topics, all the topics as we discussed in the first part.
Thank you, Gilad. We have here another question from Nicole, who's asking how many opportunities are there for people with advanced degrees in areas such as science, arts, humanities, given that she understands that the population in Israel has a very high level of education And she supposes that some of the interesting jobs are already taken by people who emigrates to Israel with these degrees. Are there new opportunities? I have heard, for example, that Israel is trying to develop the Negev and also an important part of the north, and that there are going to be huge opportunities in Israel for people doing Aliyah.
Especially now we talk about, I come from the field of mediation. I'm a lawyer, but I'm also a mediator. And in the mediation, we talk about the fact that the cake is not constant, it's not stable. You can make the cake bigger. Alia, when you talk about changing the way Israel demographic is spread, you're right. We're trying to take this opportunity of Corona. There are people that understand that we can work in a different way to develop new opportunities, to take a startup nation and develop that in order to deal with the Corona situation and the fact that, yes, it is hard in a country where there are a lot of smart people to find, the good opportunities. But I can tell you, it's not by accident that Israel is, I think, the second biggest NASDAQ country represented, right?
Yes.
We know how to create new opportunities. And I think when talented people come, usually they come with new ideas, new potential that they create opportunities. But obviously, while Aliyah is a positive word, we go higher. I myself, my parents were shlichim. I personally was a shaliach in the United States. I know how difficult also Aliyah is. I cannot promise Aliyah is just a garden of roses, right?
Yeah, we all know that.
It is difficult. It is difficult dealing with different languages and sometimes, just moving and understanding what's your unique part. But, we're a country of immigrants in that sense. So I think, Bezrat Hashem, we can deal with everything, but there are no guarantees, obviously.
Yes, I have an idea that when there's a will, there's a way. When people want to do Aliyah, they will find their way to make it happen and to arrive to Israel and succeed.
Yes, and I think, first of all, is to expect it to be challenging is important. Some people come and expect everything to work out. And while we're very happy, it's like when you start a new job. I always tell that my younger siblings, when they start a new job, don't expect everyone to wait for you with a red carpet, right?
Exactly.
For everyone, it's just a normal day. So for regular Israelis, when they meet Aliyah, they'll be happy, but they have life to live. So
Exactly.
It's very important, as I mentioned, like the very notion of supporting Aliyah, the very act, also supporting Olim is, I would say, both sides of the ocean need to support the Olim, even after the Aliyah.
Okay, and I was making you a question, Gilad, before we started the conversation publicly. I was
feeling that we're already having it.
Yes, but I was curious to get your opinion on how do you see the new treaty, that the peace treaty that Israel has signed with the United Arab Emirates. How does that affect the region? How does that affect the wealth of Israel? How do you see it?
So I will talk now as a conflict resolution expert and not as Gilad, okay? And I will look in the Israeli society. There is a debate whether or not this treaty changes the equation for peace for territories, or territories for peace, or not. Because behind this treaty, there is the question of whether or not the annexation was realistic, right? Annexation of the West Bank or parts of it. So now the question is, did Israel pay for the treaty with the annexation, or is it independent? And whether or not your opinion about the annexation was positive or not, we need to understand the treaty in light of that question. I don't know to tell you what's the right answer for that, but that's part of the equation. I can tell you that obviously having a treaty with such a rich and I would say, progressive country in comparison at least to the region couldn't come in a better time. In the day after it was published, there was already published that a very big contract was signed between an Israeli company and one of the Emirates states. So in the sense of having opportunities, we talked about making the lemon lemonade. So if the coronavirus helped us to reach this point that we can expand the region that we're doing business with, at least from that perspective, couldn't come in a better time. And peace is always a good thing.
I do agree with you. I would like to know if there are other questions from people from the audience. I see here many people connected. I would like to know if there's something that they would like to know from Gilad. Si la gente del público tiene alguna otra pregunta que quisieran hacerle a Gilad para poderla compartir con él. I don't see more questions, Gilad. I would like to give the word to Nelly, and also to thank you very much in my personal, from my personal perspective, but also from the group that was part of this conversation, because it has been a wonderful experience, and hopefully we will repeat it in the future.
I will offer whoever wants. I guess you know how to contact the Bar-Ilan friends in Mexico. They have my details. I'm available for anything. Both are Aliyah related, but I guess also just professional areas. For your questions, if you want to be part of what we do in the Israeli Congress by helping Israel to stay a Jewish democratic state, you're most invited. We'll be happy to have partners in that area.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Nelly, please join us to do the closing remarks. Also, Gilad, to let you know that your family members are part of the conversation. We can say hello to Anita Braverman, that I can see that she's joining the Zoom this time.
Hola, Anita.
That's right.
She's on mute. She's on mute.
Doctor, it has been an honor to hear you. Thank you for sharing your knowledge. Ariel, nuevamente, muchísimas gracias por acompañarnos esta vez. Y queremos invitar a todos que nos sigan en redes sociales. Esta plática y las anteriores estarán guardadas en nuestro canal de YouTube y en nuestras redes sociales. Quiero aprovechar para invitarlos a nuestra siguiente conferencia, que será el domingo 30 de agosto a las 12 del día. Y vamos a estar con la Escuela de Robótica y tratará sobre inteligencia artificial con la profesora Sarit Kraus. Será extraordinaria. Nuevamente, muchas gracias a todos por acompañarnos y nos vemos a la siguiente. Que tengan bonito día. Gracias.
Gilad, here's Nathan to say hello.
Hello. And we'll need some artificial intelligence to solve Israelis' conflict. Great to see you. I will call you later.
Enjoy it.
Bye-bye.